politics ultimately is the story of the future.
Mm.
Those are the decisions that are going to dictate what our futures look like. That's ultimately, as I see it, what politics comes down to is what stories are we writing for the future in this moment in time.
Hey everyone, I'm Thais Sky. Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women by women on conversations that matter. Hello everybody. Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim, the podcast. It is such an honor to have you on this beautiful day. The interview that you are about to listen in on with Omkari Williams is just so powerful. But first, I do have to give a little trigger warning. We do talk about some things that are rather uncomfortable, like sexual assault, like rape, like abortion. So if you are triggered by those topics, please tread lightly. But I think it's also important that we talk about these things. It's important, particularly with the political conversation going on right now with Kavanaugh and his confirmation and the upcoming elections. It's just, this is a really important time in the United States, and these conversations must be had. But we have to take care of ourselves, right? As women, we have to take care of ourselves. This is a really turbulent times. Continuing to listen to stories of people who have been sexually assaulted, molested, raped, it takes a toll on our system to be constantly reminded of rape culture, to be constantly reminded of the ways that we are not respected in our society. I mean, it takes a toll on our bodies, particularly if we have intimate stories about these things. It can be exhausting. It can re-trigger our trauma. It can send us into a spiral of collapse and anxiety. We have to be treading carefully. And that means taking good care of ourselves. That does not mean burying our head in the sands. Sands are plural now, I guess. Sand. It does not mean not knowing what's happening. I know that that's a coping mechanism of choice. It's very easy to do, to just shut off the news and not even worry about what's happening in the world as a form of protection. This is something that Carrie Kelly mentioned in that interview a couple episodes ago. But the point is, we can't just bury our heads, but we can be very, very intentional about how we let information in. We can curate our newsfeed on Facebook and Instagram to make sure that it is balanced with both what we need to know, what is important to know, and also things that will inspire us and lift us and remind us of our holiness and of our goodness, right? We need both. So one other thing that I think is very important that I mentioned right off the bat, are you registered to vote? Are you registered to vote? I talk a little bit about voting in this interview with Omkari, about how it's a moral obligation. This is not something that you should do because you want to be a good person. This is what you should do because you are a person, and we are a democracy, and this is how we create change. And voting is not enough. It's not the end all be all, but it is an all. It is something we must do. We must participate in. I'm an immigrant to this country. I elected to become an American citizen. I made my vows to this country, and I take those vows very seriously. And it breaks my heart that me as an immigrant take more seriously our democracy than people who have the privilege of being born here. Listen, I know that America is fucked in so many ways. I get that. But it can be so much more fucked. And in so many other countries, it is so much more fucked. So the fact that we live in a democracy, the fact that we have the right to vote, it is a privilege. And it is a privilege that we must exercise responsibility over. That means registering to vote. I don't care if you live in a predominantly blue state and your vote don't quote unquote matter. Go register to vote and then go vote. Go vote, because this is what we do. This is what we get to do. So do it. I don't want to hear any excuses. In fact, I don't think there are any excuses anymore. You can do mail-in ballots now. You can register to vote as easily online. I mean, I want to be tender and careful to those who have physical limitations and issues that prevent you from actually going out to quote-unquote vote. Not quote-unquote. There's no quote-unquote in that. To go vote, I want to be sensitive to all of our specific challenges that we have in our lives. And if there's a will, there's a way. And this is a moral imperative. this election cycle is one of the most important election cycles in our country, and also inevitably in the world, since our politics really affects the world. So we have to go vote. We have to get our voices heard, and this is one way to do that. Okay? Okay, what else do I want to share? Oh, Patreon. Thank you for all of you who support this podcast on Patreon. If you don't know, Reclaim has its own Patreon page. You can go to patreon.com/Thais Sky. And we have a fierce little community there where every Friday I release the next week's episode. So you get 4 days with the episode before it goes out live to the general public. We also do community calls where we get together once a month and we witness each other and support each other, and we're together. We're together. You know, consciousness raising groups in the 1960s and 70s was the most radical thing, because women came together and started talking about their problems and recognizing and realizing that they are not alone in their problems. And so these community calls are just that. There are ways for us to talk about things that we may not feel comfortable talking about with our friends or with our family, but there are things that are in our hearts, and to be witnessed and to have, some bear witness to our pain is so transformational. These are not coaching calls. They're not teaching calls. They're simply an opportunity for us to be in circle together, to talk about what's going on. Shame cannot exist in the light. And so these conversations, these community calls are ways to bring things that are bringing shame into our hearts, bringing them out so that we can move through the shame and find our power back. These calls are so, so helpful in the community and so important, and it's a part of being a Patreon member. And you can become a Patreon member for as little as $1 a month. I mean, come on. For as little as $1 a month, you get to be a part of this awesome community. You get to get episodes before everybody else. And I'm also going to start doing more mini-sodes. I know I did that one mini-sode a couple weeks ago and I said I would do more, but I decided I am going to do more mini-sodes, but they're only going to be available for those that support the Patreon, because Reclaim needs your support. It takes so much time to edit these podcasts, to make these things as beautiful as they are out into the world. And your money goes directly back to the podcast and helping me with better equipment, with a support system, people that can edit the podcast for me and that can make it even better for you. So if you love Reclaim and you want to see Reclaim keep going into season 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, please consider supporting Reclaim through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Thais Sky. You can join our community calls. And you can get my mini-sodes twice a month. How amazing is that? How amazing is that? Okay. So let me bring Omkari on. I want to read you her bio real quick. Omkari Williams is the host of the Stepping Into Truth podcast, as well as a speaker and coach whose work is helping to bring the voices and wisdom of women into the world. I've actually been on Omkari's podcast, Stepping Into Truth, so you can go search for it on iTunes. We talk all about the worthiness window. It was a beautiful conversation. I highly recommend you going to go check that out. Okay, back to her bio. As a Black woman who isn't African American, she has a unique and multi-layered viewpoint on the important conversations we're having around race, gender, and social justice. Her experiences as an actress, political consultant, and executive coach also informs her work with women's stories. Omkari speaks to and coaches women from all over the world, teaching and encouraging them to share their most important stories. And she says, if you think our stories can't make a difference, the Me Too movement is a perfect example of women's stories making a huge change in the world. True that. You can learn more about Omkari at omkariwilliams.com. You can also go to you can go to the show notes and you can get all the links there. So let's bring Omkari on. And as you're listening to Omkari, I want you to be thinking about your own relationship with your voice. What stories have you not shared to the world, and why? What is your thoughts and relationships about your stories and being seen and heard for your stories? What stops you from being more open and truthful about the things that have happened to you? And how can you start to step into your voice in a bigger way? Because the world needs you. The world needs us. This is how we create change, is through women's stories. Having someone tell their story and seeing mine reflected in theirs makes all of us come together. It creates a connection, a community, a a power that allows us to feel more confident in our own stories. I wasn't seeing much my representation in the media as a white Brazilian. I didn't see that much except for, Brazilian supermodels, which not very relatable to me. But I never really saw my type of people on TV unless I went for Brazilian TV, in which case that's a totally different story. But here in this country, right, what's depicted as Latina is a very small trope of what Latinas really are. And, the more that we talk about this and say, hey, like, this is what it looks like to be a Latinx person, and it doesn't look anything like the trope that we see in the media, the more we give power to other Latinx people to say something, to speak up, to be seen, to be heard. So our stories gives other people permission to be seen and heard. This is how we create change. And Omkari is she has such a brilliant wisdom around this, and I know you're going to really dig this interview. So let's bring her on. All right, Omkari, I'm so honored to have you on the podcast. I'm so excited for the conversation that we're about to have. It thrills me to no end that I get to speak to you right now.
Yeah, me too. I've been really looking forward to this. Thank you so much for having me.
We met at McKenna Held's Your Leadership Recipe Live event in Macon, Georgia. And I was just immediately drawn to you and your energy and your presence. And I would love for you to tell people a little bit about what you do.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, one of the best things about that, and I loved pretty much everything about it, but the women that I met were so fantastic. And you were among the group of 3 in particular that I thought I have got to stay in touch with these women because they're awesome. So let's see. So what I'm up to right now, we're in this completely chaotic moment in time as you and I are having this conversation. All of the upheaval around the Supreme Court nomination and confirmation of Kavanaugh has happened, and it's gotten people really riled up. And one of the things it's allowed me to explain in a way that I probably haven't been able to before is how incredibly critically important story is in our lives. Because what we saw here were 2 stories being told, and how they were held, and how the story that Dr. Christine Blasey Ford told was held in one way, and how the story that Judge Kavanaugh told was held in another way. And I really love being able to dive into that and saying to people, here you have these 2 stories, and how we hold them makes all the difference in the decisions that we make. And where do we give credit to women? Where do we uphold women's integrity? Where do we tear down women's integrity? Where do we assume that a privileged white man must be telling the truth? It's a fascinating time, even though part of me wants to just pull the covers over my head and go to sleep for about 30 years. Yeah, but I'm not going to do that. I don't advocate for anybody else to do that. We need all hands on deck. But that's what's really been coming up for me lately, is to just instill in people the understanding that story is critical, and start paying attention to the stories, not just that we tell ourselves or tell to our immediate family or our closest friends, but the stories we tell as a society.
Yeah. When Trump was elected, I vowed that I was going to stay more active and more participatory in these conversations about politics. Trump was one of the many catalysts that helped awaken me to my white privilege, as I shared extensively on the podcast. And I'm not going to lie, I've gotten tired, and it's only been, almost 2 years, since he was, I've gotten so tired. And with Kavanaugh, I had hopes. I really had hopes that the tide was going to change, that things are going to start to move. And I don't know, people are like, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because this is America. But I am surprised because I had big hopes for America. And I'm curious how you've been navigating this.
Well, that's a really good question. And let me sort of start with that. I still have high hopes. I still believe that the tide will turn.
Mm.
And I actually think that in some ways, this defeat will be critical to the tide turning, because for the tide to turn, this whole process needs to be even more intersectional than it has been to date. We need more allies from all spectrums. And I think that this nomination fight and listening to the truth that this woman spoke and watching how this man could behave in a way that no woman could ever behave and ever get hired to do anything ever again. Having those opposing images in our head and starting to understand how critical it is to be engaged on some level in politics, because what politics ultimately is the story of the future. Those are the decisions that are going to dictate what our futures look like. That's ultimately, as I see it, what politics comes down to, is what stories are we writing for the future in this moment in time. So from that perspective, I mean, I see some very ugly, very painful stories being written right now, but I also see the potential for a significant shift. And I see the potential for women stepping up and using our voices loud and clear for the first time maybe in history. We've most of us been taught to behave a certain way and not to yell and not to be shrill and not to be too loud and to just sort of tamp ourselves down. And I think that the lid has kind of blown off of that, and women are basically in this fuck it mood. Yeah. I'm bringing whatever I'm bringing, and I'm going to speak out, and I'm going to be loud, and you can say whatever the hell you want, and I don't give a damn because I am done. Yeah. And I think we needed to get to done, and we're going to need to get to done over and over and over, because something that was said over the weekend by the majority leader in the Senate was that this will blow over, by which I took him to mean women will forget about this, they'll stop being mad about this, and they'll just go back to their normal lives.
They'll stop being catty and dramatic. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think he's dead wrong. And it's our job to prove him dead wrong and say, you know what? Nope, we're not going to forget about this. What we're going to do is we are going to the polls, and we're going to put women in positions of power, and we're going to start changing the dynamic of how the story evolves and how the story is written.
Yeah. I think what I feel frustrated with is that voting feels so limited. You vote like once every 2 years or once a year, depending on your election cycle. And then you kind of just twiddle your thumbs and you hope that the person that you voted for, gets elected in office. And if it doesn't, it just feels so hopeless. It feels like there's nothing else that we can do. And I think that then feeds into, well, then I'm just going to bury my head in the sand and I'm just not going to look and participate because there's nothing I can do.
I agree that is a feeling a lot of people had. I still have. I've heard people say that often. I think that part of the problem is that we don't actually understand how our democracy is supposed to work anymore, so we don't participate in it in the way that we best could. But that aside, I think that voting is not enough.
Yeah.
Absolutely not enough. That is the bare minimum that we should be doing. We should be really focused on things that are important to us. And it doesn't have to be the issue that your sister or your mother or your best friend is invested in. But find that issue that is important to you and start doing something to make a change around that particular issue. And that, to me, is where we start being engaged citizens and where we, women in particular, start taking back our power. mean, we have so many issues that are so important to us and disproportionately important to women than they are to men. Because we are still the primary child carers in our society. We are still the ones who give birth to those babies. We are still the ones who have to take time off from our jobs when we have those children. And all of these things have repercussions later on in our lives. I mean, besides that women don't get paid as much as men, because we take time off to have children and raise children, we don't have as much money in Social Security at the end of our working lives as men who aren't taking those years off to raise their kids. So there's all of these things that come into play. And I just think that, you know, it all again comes back down to story, because the story we've been told is that women's job is to stay home and take care of the kids. And even when that story evolved and said, no, we can go out and work, it never evolved to the point where it was like, oh yeah, we'll go out and work and the men will stay home. No, it was we go out and work and then we come home and we do all the things that we didn't do during the day because we were at work. So shifting those stories and telling little girls different stories and telling them stories about powerful women who get to make choices on their own and decide what's best for them across the board, those things feel really important to me. And shifting the story of our society, which is this patriarchal society, and saying, you know what, this is working for a really small minority of the country, and we're going to just burn this to the ground because this doesn't work for most people, and they've had their turn for hundreds of years, thousands of years, really, and we're done. We're just done. And moving on and just saying, okay, let's write a different story. Let's write a more equitable, just story.
Something you said sparked, this thought that, men are afraid now of like touching women, are afraid of speaking to women. And there are some men who are like, look, I never sexually assaulted anybody. I've never touched anybody. And they kind of say it from this energy of, you should see me as the good person, right? Like I'm the good man because I never sexually assaulted anybody. And the response is actually, no, you're normal. Like that's what normal behavior is. Normal behavior is you don't go assaulting people. That should not be
you don't
praised.
Get brownie points for not having ever assaulted someone.
Right. I feel like it's almost the same thing about voting. Voting should be just a standard behavior. You operate in this democracy, you pay taxes, you vote. It should not be something that we're like commending. And I think that the fact that we're kind of making it seem like it's like you're going to get a brownie point for it, I think almost trivializes how important it is and how normal it is. It's like the bare minimum of what you should be doing.
There are countries in the world, including, I believe, Australia, that fine you if you don't vote. And I think that's an excellent idea because you live here, you should be a participating member of the society. That just, I agree, it's the bare minimum. And, I love when I go and vote and I get that I voted sticker and I'm thinking, yeah, of course I did. I don't need a sticker so that people can pat me on the back about this. You should get a sticker that says, I was too damn lazy to vote. Why don't you just kick me in the butt? That's the sticker that,
Yeah. But I do also want to name and recognize that in many places and in many ways, voting is a privilege. There are many states where you can't vote if you are
one of the things that right. Well, and that is a law that people are actively working to change. And I am so glad of that because the idea in our society is that if you have been convicted of a crime and you have served your time, the notion is that you have then paid your debt to society. So why are we still punishing you by disenfranchising you?
Exactly.
That does not make any sense to me. But it's very much tied into the whole system and how overwhelmingly racist it is.
Yes.
Because the prison population is so disproportionately Black and people of color, and disenfranchising those particular groups that tend to vote more liberally works to the benefit of the patriarchal structure that we are living under.
Yeah.
So they are not motivated to change that, but we should be, from no other reason at all than just the simple fairness and decency of it. You've done your time. You're supposed to be able to move on with your life.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a real problem. There's a measure on the ballot in Florida this November addressing exactly that, and I don't remember how many people it would give back their voting rights to.
I think it was like 1.8 million.
It was over 1 million, if I'm remembering correctly. And I remember thinking, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's just one state.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal. Yeah. And if we want to live in a society that is truly about justice, then we need to look at all of the places where that is not what we are doing.
Yeah.
Not, we need to start paying attention. And this is what I mean when I say that people can get engaged on any issue that they want. It doesn't have to be your issue or my issue. There are many, many places in our society where things simply are not fair, where justice is not being served. And to just pick an issue and say, this is where I'm going to put my stake in the ground and I'm going to work on this issue and this is what I'm going to do because this speaks to me. I'm good with that. It doesn't have to be my issue.
Right. Yeah, I have an issue that I think it should be everybody's issue, but that's just Thais Guy on her.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, I think racial justice is of critical importance, and I think every white woman should be focusing her efforts on it. I think if white women wanted to, we could like take over our government. Like we could
absolutely
kick out every single GOP member if we wanted and if we really voted for it. But so many of us are complicit in upholding patriarchy and also white supremacy, and I feel like
because it works for those women,
right?
It does. It works for them. They get the cookies for just participating in that system. Someone else is paying the bills, someone else is doing the work, someone else is, and the list just goes on. And all they have to do is keep their mouths shut. Because when you hear these women and you hear the vitriol that some of them spewed at Dr. Blasey Ford, I think, my God, A, you're a female yourself. B, do you have a sister or a daughter? Or you certainly had a mother. Do you not understand the damage that kind of self-hatred is doing to the women around you, not only to you? I mean, I'm always sort of stunned by their willingness to be complicit, but they are. And that's the hardest part of the battle is there's nothing to be done about that because we can't change people's minds. People change their own minds. Yeah. All we can do is show them an alternative way of experiencing things.
I mean, I have to be honest, like I used to hate women. I used to slut shame women, right? I used to call women emotional and dramatic and catty. I used to take great prides in having predominantly male friends. And I dismissed women as, all they wanted to do was go shopping. And we didn't have anything in common. And it took a lot of my own healing of what being a woman feels like and means to me, and this idea of the feminine and what that looks like and what that means. And the more I opened myself up to my own womanness and what it means for me to be a woman, the more I was able to then start to accept other women. So I gotta admit, like, if you had asked me 10 years ago about Kavanaugh, I would have still not have been for him because, I am not into anything that the GOP does. But in terms of whether or not he should not get appointed simply because of Ford's testimony, I don't know, Omkari. I don't think my prognosis would have been very good.
That's really interesting, Thais, because I I would have been surprised. If you and I had had this conversation 10 years ago and you said that to me, I would have thought, that is so strange, because why would she not understand what that might be like, you know? And I
Yeah.
think that this is, to me, the crux of the problem, is that we women are so often pitted against one another
Mm-hmm.
that we can lack empathy for one another.
Well, we're lacking empathy for us. We hate ourselves,
Yes,
you
there's
know,
a lot of self-hatred,
and
and
it's hard to
yeah.
extend that. It's hard to extend empathy outwards when, I mean, if every single woman has, I would say, I don't want to say 100%. So we'll say, I don't know, 98% of women have experienced sexual assault. That means 98% of women know exactly what, Dr. Ford went through, knows exactly what that experience feels like. And yet still, GOP women have had no qualms about putting him into the highest court in the land because it happened so long ago and it was just assault. It wasn't rape, and it's she said, he said, and who knows what actually happened. And, clearly she's just being dramatic and, whatever else people are saying.
Yeah, and I have to tell you that that is the stuff that made my head practically explode.
Yeah.
Is that notion of, oh, it was so long ago, like that matters. I don't understand that thinking, because, yeah, it might have been a really long time ago, but that doesn't make it okay. And I don't believe the boys will be boys crap. I mean, what the hell? Who
Yeah.
would want their daughter treated the way that that Dr. Ford was treated as a 15-year-old?
Right.
No one. And so I'm very confused when women take that attitude, and especially given that most of the women I know, it's not necessarily an assault as severe as what Dr. Ford experienced, but we've been in a position where some guy has put his hands on us
Mm-hmm.
without our permission.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely been in that position. And it's always awful. There's
Mm-hmm.
always that fear, and the things that we women do to just navigate the world and stay safe. The
Mm-hmm.
way, we'll squish ourselves into the tiniest little box of human we can when we're in a crowded elevator, so that we're not touching some guy and accidentally giving him the wrong message, or,
Mm-hmm.
walking to our cars with our keys between our fingers just in case someone approaches us. And the list of things that we do to navigate this world and not be assaulted
Mm-hmm.
is so long.
Mm-hmm.
And that we don't have the ability to sort of look at that from an internal perspective of, what does that cost me every day? What does that
Yes.
cost my sisters every day?
Mm-hmm.
What does that cost that woman who lives across the street who drives me crazy, but this should not happen even to her
Mm-hmm.
every day?
Well, I think about like when I was at the throes of my binging bulimia experience, how much time I spent thinking about food, thinking about my body, hating myself, thinking about what I was going to eat and how many calories it was and who I was going to eat with and when I was going to eat. And, oh, can I go to this event if I know there's food there? And, it's so much energy
Yeah.
that when you don't even realize you're expending until it's taken away from you, right? Until you don't have to do it anymore. And then you realize, oh my gosh, we're keeping all these incredible, powerful women in our society distracted with their bodies. Can you imagine what work they could do, what they could contribute, who they could be if they weren't so distracted by their bodies? And then I'll add this. Can you imagine the power that women would feel if they weren't feeling so powerless every day in navigating this world?
I know. And that's why they do what they do. They don't want us to feel powerful in that way. They don't want us to understand what we could do, who we could be, what we could create. They
Yeah.
don't, because
Yeah.
once we understand that, once we really get that, we are their worst nightmare.
Mm-hmm. The men who are coming out sharing that they were abused and that they were harmed by the Catholic Church and by priests. No one's really asking them why it take them so long.
No,
Yeah.
nope, they're
We're
not.
just we're just taking their word for it and we're supporting them and trying to hold the Catholic Church accountable for this behavior. And so it's so interesting that when it comes to women's testimonies of sexual assault, it's what took you so long. When it comes to men, it's like, of course we're going to support you. Of course we believe you.
Yeah. And that is also part of it, is that there is that complete double standard. And people understand why men didn't report. They understand how painful and humiliating this experience was for them. But they don't extend that same understanding, that same compassion to women. And that's because women are still looked at as if we're property.
Yeah.
We're not looked at as whole human beings in our own right. We're looked at as an extension of first our fathers and then our husbands. And, it's just the whole layer of people between us and being autonomous is crazy. But it's always, there is some man at the end of that picture. There's the, I wouldn't let my wife do this kind of attitude that some men have, as if they're entitled to let their wives do anything. Their wives are presumably adults and don't need their permission to do anything. But we don't even bat an eye when people say that. We just, if we do bat an eye, we rarely bat an eye verbally. We just internally go, oh, Neanderthal, and keep moving. But if we don't start calling that out, if we don't start calling that attitude out, where women are held to such a different standard than men because women are looked at as extensions of men, whereas men are looked at as autonomous beings, we're not going to make a lot of progress. We can't keep silent. It reminds me of, in the 80s when the AIDS epidemic was so prevalent, when it was just at its height, there was a slogan, and I remember seeing it, and it was silence equals death. And yeah, that's sort of how I feel right now, is silence equals death. If we women do not speak, then we will literally, some of us die. There will be women who die from a botched illegal abortion when they overturn Roe v. Wade, which is absolutely their goal. There will be more women who die at the hands of abusive boyfriends or husbands. Absolutely. And women will be less inclined to report or seek safe shelter because they're afraid of not being believed. Whereas if we start to use our voices, if we start to speak out, the sheer numbers will begin to have an effect that moves us towards a more just system. It's like the Me Too movement. When it was just a small number of people, no one was paying much attention. But then when all of a sudden there was voice after voice, and certainly the celebrity status of some of those voices was a critical component, but it wasn't just the celebrity. That wouldn't have been enough. It wouldn't have been enough if it was just two women. It was the number of women. That made all the difference.
Yeah. Just hearing you talk about how their goal is definitely to overturn Roe v. Wade, and the thought process I just had of like complete disgust for this country, and then a sense of recluse and safety that I live in a state of California where we are progressive and where we're going to continue to allow safe abortions to be legal and take place in the state. And then so I felt comfortable, and then I felt a sense of guilt of, oh my gosh, look at me only thinking about myself and my privilege and not thinking about all the women in all the other states who have, probably are going to have that service taken away and what they're going to do. And then again, that sense of anger and rage at this country and at white men for doing this. And then I experienced this whole thing, right? It happens in like 30 seconds. And then I experienced so much rage at my fellow white women for not taking a stand against white men. Instead, we feed them, we bathe them, we clothe them, we take care of them, we we stay in a delusion that these men are going to protect us, when we know at the end of the day, at the bottom of our hearts, we know that the patriarchy does not give us what we want, but we would rather be protected by the patriarchy and sell out each other, and particularly women of color, than to look at the possibility that we are being invited to create something new, something inclusive. And then it gets to be heartbreaking. And then I get to feel hopeless. And then, it's like,
Yeah.
it's just, there's so many emotions. And I know I'm not the only one feeling such a wide range of emotions
Not at
around
all.
this. And yeah. And it's,
No.
I don't even know.
But here's the thing, and you're absolutely not the only one. I mean, I literally, these days, I wake up in the night and I'm so angry because during the day I've been keeping myself busy and I've been doing what I need to do, and I have, things to focus on. I have my clients, I have this, I have that. At night, that's when it shows up. And what I am committed to is taking those feelings and moving them into action, because that's all I can do. And if I can bring other women along, that's absolutely great. But if I can't, then I at least need to do what I can do. But I actually do believe that when we start standing in our own truth, when we start actively sharing our stories out loud, that we make a difference. A week or so ago, we here in Savannah, Georgia, where I live, did an abortion speak out at one of our local centers. And it's the first time we've ever done this. And what we did was we invited 8 women to share their stories of abortion or their relationship with Planned Parenthood. And there was an audience of people there whom the women, most of them, they might know 1 or 2, but they didn't know most of the audience. And there were probably 35 or 40 people in the audience. And the point of it really was to have these women be able to share their stories and have these women be able to talk about abortion the same way we talk about any other significant life decision, without shame, without being silenced, without this overwhelming fear of being ostracized. And my piece in this whole thing was to work with the women around their stories and help them craft their stories in a way that they felt comfortable telling them. I didn't put anything in or take anything out. They made all of the decisions, but we wanted them to be supported in this because, most of them were literally vibrating with fear before they did this, because they'd never spoken these stories to more than 1 or 2 people, if they had ever told anyone. It was such an affirming experience. And these women just blew me away. They were so courageous. And it was an amazing thing to witness the power that these women took back into their lives by not having a secret.
Yeah.
And
well,
I
let's talk about abortion then. Let's do it. Let's talk about it right now on this podcast. Let's talk about abortion, because I feel like this is something, just the word abortion sounds so shameful. It sounds so sticky. It sounds like you failed, you fucked up. Like you
it does.
not, like you did this to yourself, right? These are all words and thoughts and feelings that come up for me when I think of the word abortion.
Right.
From cultural indoctrination, not my own personal beliefs on abortion. But the main one is irresponsibility. You were irresponsible.
Right.
To either have an abortion or to want an abortion.
So it was interesting because there were 8 women. So 2 of the women there, 2 of them, so a quarter of the women in that group of 8, they wound up having abortions because they had been raped and had gotten pregnant as a result of rape.
Fuck.
So 25% of the women in that group, and this was just a random group of women. Right. I did not know what their stories were before they came on board. So that's 25%. And then the other stories varied. But the thing that was abundantly clear to me was that the narrative around abortion has been co-opted by the religious right.
Yes, it has.
And that the way we think about abortion is so distorted and so not near the truth of it.
Yes.
I mean, you're killing a baby. Well, that's one way of looking at it, I expect. But when you consider what is actually the case here, is this is not a viable being. It's not even recognizable as a human in most cases. I mean, and it's rare.
It's a clump of cells.
It's a clump of cells that is, around the size of a large vitamin pill.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the way we describe this is just horrifying to me, because it totally takes out of the whole equation that there is a living, breathing person with an entire life who needs to make a decision for the rest of her life.
Yes.
And that somehow we get to decide for someone what she should do for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Because of us. I mean, I would never, ever advocate that someone who didn't believe in abortion have one unless it was for some medical reason. And even then, I probably would simply say, this is what my concern is. I want you to be safe and healthy.
Yeah.
And then I would leave it there because it's not my decision.
Yeah.
But the reason that we can even be having this conversation is because the patriarchal system we live under thinks women are property, and so our bodies are the property of the patriarchy, and they get to decide what we do with them.
Yeah. And it's really
That's
interesting
for the conversation.
It's really interesting how the conversation of abortion is predominantly a woman's burden, right? Because and
yes,
to a certain extent that makes sense. It is happening in our bodies. It is our responsibility. But there's so little conversation about the fact that we couldn't get pregnant if it weren't for men's semen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I don't know a single woman who's ever gotten pregnant without the contribution of a man in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, maybe except for Jesus, Mother Mary, who knows, questionable.
Yeah.
So why is there never a conversation of, okay, if you don't want abortions, right? If you don't believe in abortions, if you think that the minute a woman's pregnant, she needs to stay pregnant, why then isn't there a greater campaign for men to have birth control, birth control pills, not just condoms, to take greater responsibility of understanding ovulation, understanding women's cycles, so that they know when to be asking, their partners, listen, are you ovulating right now? Are you comfortable with having unprotected? You know what I mean? Like, just have men be a part of the conversation, but they're not. Men know very little about women's cycles. Women know very little about women's cycles. We're now basically being forced to be on birth control pills at a very early age without any conversation about what a cycle looks like, what it means to ovulate, when your fertile window is, and what it even looks like. I'm saying this, and people may be like, Taste, that's, ridiculous. I'm saying this because that is my story. I didn't know about my own fertility, about my own cycle. I didn't even know that there's a difference between the word vulva and vagina. I shared this in the podcast with some other guests too. Like, I didn't know these things until 18 months ago, and I'm almost 30.
Right.
Our society does not teach us about our bodies. It doesn't teach men about our bodies. It doesn't teach men how to respect women in our bodies. So we live in a rape culture where we have no control. And now one of the many, because we also have birth control options, but abortion is one of the many tools that we have at our disposal to support us in being empowered in our decision-making skills. And they're trying to take that away.
Yeah. And what I probably wouldn't even object as much as I do, although I would still object, if our society was actually structured to support those
Yes,
children
I'm so glad you said
once
that,
they
because I
were
feel the
born,
same way. Exactly.
you know?
Exactly.
But they're not. We are not set up to support that. So even if you were to bring a pregnancy to term and give birth, and then you have this baby, and let's say you decide that you do not want to keep this baby and you're going to give this baby up for adoption, and that's all well and good, unless you happen to not be white.
Yes.
Because then what happens? What are the odds that this child is going to be adopted? They go down significantly.
Yeah.
So then you have a child who was the result of an unintended, unwanted pregnancy, who is now in a home of some sort, or being bounced from foster care home to foster care home, and the quality of their life sucks.
Yeah.
But people are okay with that. That I find baffling. So the fact of life is more important than the quality of life.
Yes.
Where is the morality in that?
Yeah. It's
And
power. It's all about
it's
power.
totally a power. It's totally
Yeah.
about power. And to pretend it's anything else is to be willfully naive.
Yes.
So again, it's, what happened on that Saturday when these women came together is they told their stories.
Mm.
And it was incredibly powerful. And it shifted the engagement that we have with that kind of story. And it took a tiny, tiny bit of the shame away. So the next time they tell that story, they won't have the sweats and the palpitations and the general anxiety that they had to the same degree. And someone else can learn from their story as well.
I love
And
that you had that circle, because,
it was amazing.
it sounds amazing, and it sounds very in alignment with conscious raising circles, which was how so much of the women's movement took shape in the 1960s, right? And
Yeah.
bringing women together to share their struggles makes us feel like we're in this together, like we're holding hands together.
And
And
that was exactly it. These women who did not, for the most part, know one another, one or two knew, sort of tangentially knew one another one. But this week after the Kavanaugh hearing, they continued this conversation thread that we'd started ahead of the Speak Out, to just get their feelings about that out with each other. And I thought, that's so great.
mm-hmm.
That's so great, because they are now a support system for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need.
Yeah.
We need to be able to be supportive of each other.
Yes. So tell me, what do you think that looks like moving forward, if people are listening and they want to speak out, or they're ready to share their story, or they want to be coming into community and supporting one another? What do you recommend?
Well, okay, first off, they should reach out to me, because I can actually send them a worksheet that we used for this that might be helpful.
Okay.
And I'm happy to do that. The other thing is, and I think the most important thing is, to recognize that we all have stories to share, and that we really need to start listening to each other in a way that sometimes we forget to do, to really just listen to the story that someone has to tell us without trying to fix it or do anything to make it different or better or easier. Just be there to listen. And to also ask for that for our own stories.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we want to share something and we don't want feedback. We just need to get this thing off our chest so that we can breathe.
Yeah.
And to be able to say, I need to get this off my chest and I really don't want feedback, and not feel guilty about that, is a big thing. Because we're so taught to take care of other people that we often will forget to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
But I think the main thing that I got from that, and the main thing I really want to encourage women to start doing, is just use your voice. Do not sit silently by. When you feel something, speak about it. When you hear something that really moves you, either to anger or joy, speak about it, share it. Don't just keep it inside or just tell, your one or two close friends. Spread it out into the world, because here's the thing. When we share our stories, we build bridges between ourselves and people who are very different from us, at least on the surface. And we recognize our own strength, our own humanity, our own ability to affect change. But we don't do that when we stay siloed. When it's just us by ourselves or us with two friends, we are not drawing on the strength of the collective. It's like crowdsourcing in a way, We have so much power. Why are we limiting ourselves in that way? Why don't we use that power to make the changes we know need to happen? And the easiest way to do that is to start telling our stories.
Yeah.
When we keep our voices down, then other people get to write the narrative.
Yes. Yes, I love that so much. And I would, add to that, just my own personal little vendetta, as we're sharing our stories, let us treat others the way we want to be treated. And that means that, like, if we feel disrespected by the patriarchy, if we feel demoralized by white men, right, then let's not do that to one another. So by we, I mean women as a collective. And me specifically, I'm speaking to white women. Let's not do that to our sisters of color, right, to women of color. We have, because we're only as strong as, as we come together, all of us come together. We can't just bulldoze people and expect revolutions.
No, we can't. And also, I'd like to add to that, we also can't expect to get this right the first time. We're going to make mistakes. And people are afraid of making mistakes. They're afraid of offending someone. They're afraid of doing it wrong. They're afraid of not looking right in the eyes of the people around them.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of need to let go of that and extend the same charity to others that we would want for ourselves, because we all are going to screw up. We all do. So we make a mistake. Okay, big deal. Move on. Learn from it, move on. But I think that takes two things. It takes a willingness on the part of the person who's made the mistake to acknowledge it and make amends, apologize, do whatever is necessary. And it takes a willingness on the part of the person who might have been harmed by the mistake to understand that there was not necessarily malice. We know the difference. We know when someone is being malicious and when someone's just being clueless. Malicious, good luck with that. God bless, can't work with you. Clueless, that can be fixed. Ignorance is fixable.
Yes.
But if we're going to demonize people for their ignorance, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Because those people will just go back into their little holes in the ground and say, oh God, I can't deal with this. That's not the point. I mean, I've had people say some completely boneheaded things to me around race and gender and social justice. And my response, if I believe that they were just being ignorant, is to respond with compassion. If you're being a complete screw up and you're just doing this to, just dig at me, well then good luck, because I'm going to come back at you hard. But if you're making a mistake, we're all going to make mistakes. We need to extend a little more compassion, I think, than we often are right now.
I love that.
That feels really important to me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I think the main thing for me right now is that people are feeling so fragile. And for so many people, not people of color, because we've been looking at the world without the rose-colored glasses for a long, long time because we've had to. But for those people who are all of a sudden realizing how unjust this system truly, truly is, what I would really like is for them to just be able to take a step back, and say, okay, this is the reality that I was brought up in. I understand that I am part of this system, and I can understand that and learn to disentangle myself without diving into self-hatred, because that just slows down the process, and we can't afford the time lag. So I'm basically saying, show yourself some compassion and tough love at the same time, and get on board and keep moving. Just take the next step and examine what you're doing, and then take another step and examine what you're doing, and keep moving. It's not a competition, but we can't wait forever. The stakes are way too high right now.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I really appreciated having this conversation with you today, Omkari. You're always like just a balm to my soul. Like, you just offer so much nourishment and love, and I appreciate you endlessly. So thank you so much for sharing your stories and your thoughts with us today.
Thank you. Anytime you want to talk to me, I'm good. I'm so happy to talk to you always, because it always makes me think, and I love that. So thank you so much, Thais.
Thank you.